happy Easter for those who celebrate it, and I'm keenly aware that those that don't are part of my audience. So I do want to say that Easter joy isn't intrinsic for everyone, especially people who are on the edge of faith. You are here, many of you, because you've wandered out into the wilderness. And you didn't plan on being here. Some of us might have been forced out. Some of us chose to leave the cave. No matter how we left or how we find ourselves here, it's difficult. It's not easy. Take a deep breath. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a teacher. I am not going to give you answers to all your questions. I'm a fellow traveler, and I'm here to walk with you and maybe share some questions that have been stifled within you or that you haven't been allowed to ask in your faith tradition. It's okay to ask them here. It's okay to be curious and even to risk being labeled as a heretic or an apostate or whatever other terms of endearment that gatekeepers have to clobber us with on the way out. Many of us have left what an anthropologist would consider is a shame-honor culture. And Christianity, particularly evangelical Christianity, doesn't know how to handle questions or doubt or people who leave. And the typical reaction is to lash out and to say, well, we were never really part of the group in the first place, or the devil's got a hold of us, or we were just faking it all along just so we could draw people away. There's all kinds of things that gatekeepers trying to keep everyone else in the cave will launch at people like us who've walked away. I want to talk to you today a little bit and maybe plant a seed and encourage you to keep a journal. The journal, a lot of people keep a gratitude journal, which I love. I actually think there's probably 6 different great ideas for journals. An idea journal, a gratitude journal, a journey, a faith journey, or a deconstruction journal. I'm not saying start 6 different notebooks. Maybe you have one notebook and you comment on all these things at the end of the night. But in this case, let's just consider a faith journal or a deconstruction journal or a spiritual growth journal, or just being a human and growing in interest and awareness. I want you to consider a few questions to jot down in that journal and to leave yourself some room to think about, some space to think about. And the first one is, what did your theology bury? What did all those years growing up in that system squeeze out of you? Or force into a closet, and it has atrophied, but it hasn't died? What is it that your background or your faith story, your theology, your former theology, has put to death that you would like to see leave the tomb on this Easter or in the coming days? There's also those things that our deconstruction buries, that our deconstruction puts to death, that we don't want to see resurrected. And that, maybe we'll have time for that today. That's a really valuable thing to jot down in your journal too. There's things that I've walked away from And I look at my wife when we're on our walks, and I say, I'm so grateful that we're not back there. I'm so grateful that we don't still think that way and act that way. I'm so grateful that we've grown in these areas and we don't have those phobias or fears or loathings that were based on an understanding or a misunderstanding of other men's thoughts, whether they were put down in a book or preached from a pulpit, that never felt right. If you hear that, that's my robot vacuum in the back going to work. Affectionately, we named her Yoko. So Yoko is going to work on an Easter Sunday morning. If you can hear that, I'm not going to take the time out to turn her off now. I'll let her. She's going to head the other way soon anyway. So let's talk about these elements. I did want to show you this. This is kind of cool. Those of you who still have nostalgia or fond memories for Easter, I encourage you to retain them and to keep them. You know, we can siphon through what we don't want and keep what we do. We still have Easter traditions here in the Kirkwood household that I love. Maybe I'll share with you. But this is the Garden Tomb in Israel. You're seeing a nighttime picture of it because it is just, the sun has set recently there. And now you're getting a commercial, so we'll leave that. But that was the live picture of the Garden Tomb in Israel, which used to mean a lot. And I'm certain means a lot to many of the churches that are having Easter services around the globe today. But I want to talk to you now about a couple of these propositions. And the first one is here. If Easter is about resurrection, let's ask ourselves, what did our theology bury? And what do I want to see rise again? Well, we've all come from different faith traditions, different institutions. We all find ourselves now maybe coming from different avenues, but on a similar path now. And part of this community is that we get to know each other and get to know these different faith traditions. I mentioned walking with my wife. We live in a very Mormon area of Phoenix. We're not far from a temple. And so there's a lot of Mormons around here, a lot of Mormon churches and so forth. And as we're walking, we see people going into that, into those buildings. And I have to tell you, I am not triggered in the way I am when I drive past some churches, but it does incite in me a sorrow, especially when I see young families and young kids going into that environment. And listen, it might be very pleasant for them, and I know that some people have thrived in the environment of church and so forth, and yet again, some people in the same family, in the same church, in the same institution or denomination have found it horrid. And the thing about it is that what you're born into, you really don't have a choice about. Some people were born in the South into a background that was very racist, to family that was involved loosely or indirectly in movements like the KKK, or at least thought processes that are rampant in that area. And all of your uncles and your aunts and your family friends and the kids you grew up with think the same. And yet maybe you grew up thinking there's something wrong. There's something about this shoe that I'm told is the most comfortable shoe in the world, and yet my feet ache in these shoes. I don't find them comfortable. Even though everyone's raving about them, they've always bothered me, and there's such a relief when I get to take them off. Some of us feel that way about the faith or the culture or the backgrounds that we've been born to. Give yourself grace if you've grown up in those movements. And if you found yourself leaving those movements, it's not that you don't love your aunts and uncles and friends and parents and so forth, but you can't stand that worldview because you find it hate-filled. You find it riddled with error and superstition and needless and unnecessary cognitive dissonance that doesn't bring health or well-being to yourself or to the others around you. There might be a lot of contradictions that you grew up in. We have to give ourselves grace and space for, and you know, a pat on the back for having the courage to leave. Because many people, they just learn to live with the pain of wearing those shoes. And they never have the courage to take them off and say, these don't work for me. They're all awful. And I'm going to seek something else. So we do have to be gentle with ourselves. But when I see, you know, kids walking into those institutions, my heart pains for the ones who are going to go through deconstruction. And it's going to be hard. And they're going to be alienated or estranged from family members, and they might lose jobs or lose financial wherewithal. And they might lose a spouse over this, or their kids might feel differently about them, and so forth. And so there's all these emotions wrapped up in seeking the truth, and seeking what's right, and seeking what's health-giving to yourself and to others. So what did your theology bury in you that was there when you were a kid? For many people, it's curiosity. It's the ability to ask questions without being shamed or shunned or silenced or made to feel that you were a troublemaker or an idiot, or just somebody of ill will, that even just for thinking the question or asking the question. There are many cloistered theologies that do this, that steal our voice, that mold behavior. Peer pressure from the tribe, from the group, that make you think a real Scotsman acts like A, B, and C. And if you don't do A, B, and C, you're not a real Scotsman, right? Whether this is sometimes referred to as, in different areas, as toxic masculinity or other things. So the next thing, what are you longing to bring back to life? Did that change for y'all? Yeah. Okay. So what are you longing to bring back to life? And you might jot this down in your journal. It might be different for some of you than it is for me. I've always been, and one of the things my parents taught me was to think for myself and don't think like the group. I think oftentimes to Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, because people talk about how Jefferson was a slave owner and in a way an abuser, and yet he penned the Declaration of Independence, and he really did want to abolish slavery. And Lincoln saw in that, and so did Martin Luther King Jr. He saw invested in that document, the Declaration, the very seeds that would grow up one day, that would burst through the soil, the fertile soil that was put there, that was planted by Jefferson and others, that would one day strangle the institution of slavery and see it go away. And my parents put that seed in me, even though I grew up in thought process that was very rigid. They wanted me to be a critical thinker. They said, don't think like the group, always ask questions. And this used to bother some of my Sunday school teachers. It used to bother some of the people in the pew when I was in the pulpit. I don't know how many Sunday school teachers came to me as a pastor and were worried about my children, because my children were asking about dinosaurs and hell and the devil, and they were asking hard questions. And it always made me smile, because I thought to myself, well, are you really concerned about my children and their questions and their curiosity? Or are you more concerned that you don't really have a good answer for what this 9-year-old asked you? Now, I never put it to them that way, but it always struck me as curious. What would it look like to resurrect your voice? To have a voice again, to be able to speak freely. We all have had that experience where we have a friend where we could let our hair down. And you know I'm speaking metaphorically. But we've all had a friend we can let our hair down. Wendy and I have some deep friendships with people who've loved us in every generation of ourselves. They loved us when we were hardcore Christian nationalists, in spite of that, because they leaned politically in a different way and philosophically and religiously. But these are dear friends of ours. They loved us when we were like that, in spite of our views, and they love us now, even though our views are changed and we're completely different people. Not everybody's like that. Some of you have lost family, have lost friends, are being judged, are being bullied in some ways, because in that shame honor culture, they're in the shun phase. They're scared other people are going to follow you. They're scared you're going to be given legitimacy to doctrines or ideas that make them scared. It's always lovely to be heard, to be able to speak without a filter sometimes, without wondering, am I going to be judged for this? Are they going to whisper behind my back because I brought up this question in the small group, right? How dare I? It's always so liberating to be able to speak freely. What about your curiosity? Your curiosity is what led you here. The fact that you weren't comfortable in those shoes of fundamentalism or evangelicalism or Christian nationalism or certainty or exclusivity, or this idea that God was, I'm sorry, such a loser, that his plan got so disrupted by a lesser angel that the vast majority of his creation is going to be tortured forever in hellfire. Have you ever thought of that? We'll think about more of those questions later, but you know, your curiosity about things you're told and you're meant to accept by the group, if you're going to be a part of the group and a good member in good standing in that group. And your curiosity was crushed. You learned not to ask the questions that seemed to pull the thread, that seemed to blow over the house of cards. And maybe you feel a bit ashamed that you participated in killing that part of yourself, in making that part of yourself suffer or be locked in a closet or be gagged. And now that you are growing and that you are learning to love yourself and to forgive yourself and to give yourself grace and space, maybe now you look back on that and you're angry at your old self for having participated or for allowing yourself to be manipulated in that way. Don't. It's not your shame to carry. You were born into that movement. You didn't have a whole lot of choice, and it took great courage to get you to where you are today. So be gentle with that person. And you know what? Restore your voice. Resurrect it. Have it leave the empty tomb. It doesn't belong there. And you can't allow anyone to make you stay in a closet or a cone of silence. You can't allow a tradition or a denomination or a culture or a tribe to stifle your voice and your creativity and your curiosity and your eagerness to learn and to love. What about your ability to be loved without condition? I have somebody who's very dear to me who received a text from somebody in her family recently that said, "I love you, but." I love you, but. And we've all heard that, haven't we? We've all felt that. This idea of a transactional love. Those of you who are experienced with people who are adjacent to narcissistic personality disorder, either narcissistic or toxic in their family dysfunctions, you've known this. You've seen this cycle. You see how the golden child is praised, and you, as the scapegoat or the black sheep, usually one and the same, are shamed and shunned. Even if you're doing good things and healthy things, because you're not behaving in the ascribed way, they can't praise you in their dichotomous world of black and white. You're either a hero or a zero, and you're the zero because you question things, because you don't follow orders. Well, but the golden child gets all the attention because that golden child does. I feel pity for the golden child because they're trapped in a world of pain, and they think they know, like the rat that presses the certain button in the cage and gets the sugar water. They think that's life, that they've been treated like Pavlov's dogs, and they can get, the vending machine, whether it's a mother or a husband, to dispense what they need when they offer fuel. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about narcissism in the church and the 6 different types of narcissism and how they manifest themselves in church relationships. Some of you know this all too well. You're in recovery from being a victim of narcissistic abuse, and we're going to talk about it in the coming weeks. But this week, and I won't keep you much longer, I wanted to just bring you into the thought process of where we are. Christians use holidays like they're daggers, like they're arrows. They use them as baseball bats to pound people over the head. They use them, Easter especially, as a shibboleth, where they'll say, "He is risen," and they expect you to say, "He is risen indeed." Christians say Merry Christmas, and they really don't like if you say Happy Holidays. You see, there's these tactics that the tribe uses to make sure you're a part of them and still a part of them. And that could be triggering. And I want you to look at Easter in a different way. Retain what's good. We're going to do a Syrian egg wars later today, even though I have 2 vegan children who probably won't participate. My wife and I'll do a Syrian egg wars against each other. We're going to make a Syrian kata, which is natural for the Easter holiday, and enjoy that, even though it doesn't meet our diet requirements. But retain what you love about Easter and bury the rest. Leave it in the tomb. Because maybe Easter isn't about what Christians and atheists argue about. This time of the year, that's the argument. Did Christ really rise? And so you have the resurrection apologists fighting against the atheists. And the atheists are rarely willing to admit what most historians accept, is that Christ did live and Jesus Christ did die on order of Pontius Pilate, and that some of his followers believed he rose again. This is the minimal facts theory, and yet that becomes the discussion every Easter. And you know what stays buried in that tomb when these two groups are arguing over whether Christ existed and how he did and he rose again? What's completely missing is Jesus and his teaching. The only thing given room and breath in the discussion at this time of the year is teaching about Jesus. And the church these days is much more invested in their doctrines and their teachings about Jesus than they are in the teachings of Jesus. Those teachings aren't popular today. Not with this president, not with the attraction of 80% of evangelicals to cruelty and things that are at swords points with what Christ taught about humility and pride, about loving the neighbor and the stranger, about giving drink to the thirsty and food to the hungry, about how we are to take care of the least of these, how we are to turn the other cheek, how we are to forgive, how we are to walk the extra mile. None of these teachings of Jesus are popular in the buildings and the places that carry his name. And so some of you have left those buildings and those traditions, and rightly so, because you haven't found Jesus there. Some of us have to leave Christianity to have a real occasion with the true Jesus. Sometimes those who spoke the most in behalf of God should stop speaking because they can't hear God over their own voices. And I think that's what we've found, those of us who've walked out into the wilderness. The stillness, the silence has given us ears to hear. We can see Jesus now differently than when we were in that cloistered cult-like setting where we were told what to believe. Sometimes against our conscience, and oftentimes against the very record or testimony of who Jesus is and was in the Gospels. Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in that cave. And our ears are ringing and our eyes are sore. But we're out here in the wilderness. And as our eyes adjust and the ringing leaves our ears, we're open to listen, maybe for the first time. Now, some of you say, no, look, I left all that behind, and even Jesus triggers me. And if you're there, I understand. And you're not in a place that's going to force you to bow every knee and confess on your lips. No. I will, though, suggest to you that there are teachings of Jesus which are worth keeping and worth celebrating and will make your life better, whether you're an atheist or an agnostic, or you still find yourself as somebody who may not use the term Christian, but you're enamored with the person of Jesus Christ, with this rebel who stood up to power, irrespective of his own well-being, with this heretic who attacked the religious norms of his day as being cold and careless and thoughtless and contrary to what the true God would have be true in our walk. Maybe that's all you can take away from Jesus right now, is the fact that he too wandered in the wilderness, that he too was hated by his own faith tradition, slandered by his own faith tradition, led to the slaughter by his own faith tradition. Now, Easter is difficult for many of us. If you're a follower of the Lord of the Rings, though, did you love Gandalf's return as Gandalf the White? Maybe just think of it in those terms. If you're a lover of, and you still retain a fondness for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, did you get a jump start when Aslan rose from the dead and breathed life into those who were under the witch's curse and overcame evil? Maybe just retain that corner of the story and see what grows from there. But on this Easter, on this Resurrection Sunday, I'm walking with you. And all I'm suggesting to you today is to think about this in your journal. What did my theology bury that I want to rise again, that I want to restore, that will come back stronger than it was when it went into the ground? More vibrant, more vital, more powerful, more glorious. Because it can. Your voice, your curiosity, your tenderness, your empathy, which was a sin in that world. Oh, not in this one. So let's resurrect those things. Let's do it together. And then there's those things that we buried when we left the cave behind, that should stay in the cave. Could be homophobia. Could be racism. It could be otherism. There's a lot of otherism in today's Christianity. Christians, people think it's Christians versus atheists, and those are people who haven't been in the Christian world. Because it's not just about who's going to get to the buffet after Sunday and the Baptists have to beat the Presbyterians. You know that most faith groups don't believe that other faith groups are even going to be in heaven. Catholics aren't real Christians in some groups. If you're a Calvinist, nobody's a real Christian. Even some Calvinists aren't part of the elect. It gets very selective. There's a lot of otherism. Maybe you left that behind in the cave. Good riddance. So, what should stay buried? And what should come to life this Resurrection Sunday in your life and in mine? Join us next week where we're going to talk about nostalgia and the dangers of nostalgia in faith. Those things that maybe we unknowingly bring along that we should have left behind. Thank you for watching, folks. I appreciate you. I love you. It's good to be back. If you have any questions or any comments, please leave them, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube below, and I'll try and get to them, or I'll try and bring them up in the coming weeks. Until then, seek truth, celebrate wisdom, and you know what? You are courageous. Thanks for coming along.